You're watching Reality Check. When the Taliban swept to power, one of the biggest fears was that they would crack down on Afghanistan's vibrant free press. But they claimed they changed. Their spokesperson held an unusual press conference saying the Taliban will respect media freedoms. A Taliban official allowed himself to be interviewed by a woman anchor from a private news channel, another first. But now, images taken and tweeted by Marcus Yam, a Kabul-based photojournalist for the Los Angeles Times, has gone viral. It shows two reporters in their underclothes standing with their backs to the camera, covered with red welts and bruises. Images tweeted by the Afghan media platform Etilat Rose show the same two men whom the publication has identified as its employees, Taki Daryabi and Nematullah Naqvi, and with close-ups of their injuries. According to Etilat Rose, the two journalists, a video editor and a reporter, were covering a protest led by women in western Kabul yesterday when they were abducted by the Taliban, taken to different rooms, beaten and tortured. One of them said, "One of the Taliban put his foot on my head, crushed my face against the concrete. They kicked me in the head. I thought they were going to kill me." This is Nematullah Naqvi, he told a news agency. He said he was accosted by a Taliban fighter as soon as he started taking pictures of the rally by women demanding the right to work and education. When, after being beaten, he asked why, he was told, "You're lucky you weren't beheaded." Several other journalists were also arrested as they covered the protests. A camera person for Tolo News, another news channel, was reportedly taken into custody by the Taliban and later released, according to tweets by Tolo journalists. So far, the Taliban has not officially responded to the violent attacks, nor is there any evidence of action against its members who beat up the journalists. Its supreme leader, in a statement, did address the question of the media, but its somewhat ambiguous wording raises doubts on how much freedom will be allowed in reporting. This is what the statement said by Hibatullah Akhundzada. "The media is an important element of the country. We will work for the freedom, functioning and improvement of media quality. Our duty is to take into account the sacred precepts of Islam, the national interests of the country, and impartiality in our broadcasts." But if anything, things could get worse. The Interior Ministry, headed by a dreaded terrorist, Siraj Haqqani, has issued guidelines for protests, which include secure prior permission from the government, furnish the purpose slogans at least 24 hours before the demonstration of the protest. Anyone found in violation will face legal action. The media watchdog Reporters Without Borders last week said that active female journalists in Kabul are now below 100 since the Taliban seized power, compared with 700 before. I spoke earlier to a journalist from Etilat Rose in Kabul, and I began by asking him, we've not named him in order to protect his identity, but I began by asking him what exactly happened. Why did the Taliban and how did the Taliban end up abducting and beating the journalists?
When the Taliban took our two colleagues that they want to take photo and video and cover the protester, we went to the police station. Then we want to speak to the Taliban to free them. Mm-hmm. Then Taliban as well take and put us on the prison.
Okay. So they arrested you as well?
Yeah. There was a little room, and there were 17 persons. Mm-hmm. We are 5 journalists. 5 of them were journalists. 2 of them my colleagues. But the 2 my colleagues, they were in another room. We didn't see them. So they put us on prison. and also beat me by a cable.
Once again, you're saying that they beat you as well?
Yeah, but 1 or 2 times, not too much. And we were about 4 hours here. Then our office, اطلاعات روز, make a call to the commission, which there is Taliban and the media. Then they make us free. But after the free me and to my colleague, we came to office, and to another colleague, they also free them also. But when they call us that please send a car, we can't come buy food because we are injured. So we send a car, then we bring to the office. When we see they can't walk because Taliban tortured them, beaten by weapon, by box, by cable,
right?
And their health was in danger. Then we send them to hospital. They were in hospital about 2 or 3 hours, and the doctor said, go home and just sleep for 2 or 3 weeks.
My gosh. Beaten them so badly, you're saying that they could barely walk, beat them with cables. Now, did the Taliban tell you and the others why they were beating all of you?
Because Taliban don't want to cover the protester, and they want from media and journalists don't share, don't aware people from this situation, and they are very worried about the protester, because when we covered them, a lot of people joined to them, and they are very worried and concerned about the protest.
Okay, the Taliban, you're saying, is worried about their image and what the protests are doing to that, and that's why they're abducting and beating you. But I just want to ask you, are your 2 colleagues, how are they doing now? Are they better? Are they okay?
Now they're okay, but they're injured extremely, and it's a very bad shock for us. When they free us, they told me, don't do it again. If you do this again, we will not free you.
I see. If you do this again, we will not free you, is what the Taliban told you when they released you. I just want to ask you in the end, I mean, obviously, there must be a lot of fear because of this. Yes, amongst all of you.
Yeah, of course. After this situation that Taliban tortured my colleagues, we are very afraid about how we should continue our work, because Taliban are not an organized together. For example, the spokesman said something else, but the police of Taliban do another thing. They don't accept what the Zabihullah Mujahid say.
Okay. So a clear disconnect between what the spokespersons are saying and what the ground reality is. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Thanks very much. We're now joined by Ali Mustafa. He's also reporting from Kabul. He is with TRT World. This is a Turkish broadcaster. Thank you very much indeed, Ali, for joining us. You've been doing fantastic work. I just want to start by asking you, Ali, about the images that have really kind of shocked everybody, the world, and I'm sure the media fraternity, of the manner in which particularly these journalists were abducted by the Taliban and beaten quite badly. You've been covering this entire period. Has anything like this ever happened before? And what do you think what triggered it, you think?
Well, it hasn't happened to me, Srinivasan. Thank you for having me on your show. But yes, we have seen those horrific images of journalists being beaten and with torture marks on their backs, on their knees, on their ankles. Some journalists that I know were also detained. But at the same time, you have to realize that if this was between 1996 and 2001, these things wouldn't even be happening. You wouldn't have any journalism. You wouldn't have any media. You have to realize that the Taliban that have entered Kabul on the 15th of August not only entered with machine guns, they also entered with cell phones. And a large part of their cadres are below the age of 20. They're all very savvy. They have cell phones. Having said that, there isn't just one Taliban. There is the intellectual Taliban or the diplomatic Taliban in Doha, Qatar. There are the ideological, extremely well-educated Taliban that come from the Paktia region and beyond. We're talking about the Haqqanis. Then there are the rural Taliban from Helmand and Kandahar. And all of these disparate groups now form the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, which is the Taliban movement. And it is the fruition of a 20-year struggle for this group to reach this point, based on nothing but fighting, number one, and then negotiating based on that fighting. So when it comes to policing and issues like that, these people don't have those skills. Right.
So you're saying it's personally not happened to you, but even in this period, when you're right that this is of course a much more different media landscape for the Taliban than earlier. But up until this point, Ali, we hadn't actually seen the Taliban beat journalists in this way. Am I right?
I think there's some context and perspective that is required here.
Okay.
You have to understand that the Taliban walked into a vacuum in this country when the government or the dispensation of 20 years just disappeared overnight.
Right.
So not only do they have to take care of governance, which they haven't yet till about a day or so ago when they announced an interim setup, but then they have to also take care of these agitations. And believe you me, these are agitations as far as the Taliban is concerned, because after the fall of Panjshir, there has been a call by what remains of the resistance movement led by Ahmad Massoud for a national uprising. We haven't seen that uprising in Afghanistan, all of Afghanistan. We have seen demonstrations on the streets of Kabul. We have seen media coverage of those demonstrations.
Right.
And we have seen individuals come out and call Taliban subhuman, call them monsters, call them non-Muslims, and any adage you could possibly think of has been used against this group.
Right.
It's been vilified so much that some people here look at them as animals.
Right. Okay. So
Which
that's the context, important context. But tell me about your own reporting experience, because you've been going around filming these incredible videos, Taliban allowing access into areas like you were able to access a CIA cell or a CIA detention site, possibly a torture site. Yes. You were walking around that.
Salt pit and cobalt.
Right. So is it that the Taliban, they're okay with journalists, doing reporting? They would prefer to do it in a kind of guided tour way? Is that, how it's been working? How is that actually working out?
You mentioned that CIA-based story. I went there with New York Times, Los Angeles Times, AFP, The Guardian, Tolo News, and other networks. There were about 8 or 9 news media organizations that were involved. The Taliban are extremely media savvy. They want positive coverage. They come to us and tell us please tell our side of the story. Please do justice to our side of the story. What they mean by that is that there's so much negative propaganda out there against them that anything that they do or have done in the past is being used against them right now, that they want some fairness, some balance, at least their side. For example, there was this report of Ahmad Shah Massoud, the legendary anti-Soviet commander and an anti-Taliban commander, his grave being desecrated. And that is being picked up by Reuters and whatnot. But the Taliban spoke to us and said, yes, in the battle for Panjshir, the tombstone was damaged, and we want to repair it and restore it to its original condition. And we condemn any desecration of any grave. But this story isn't carried. The images of the tombstone fallen down by whoever did this is the image that is prevalent. So there's a big disconnect in what the reality is and what the perception is. And the perception often is driven by the more educated, more Western-oriented, also the proxies of the Americans that were here for 20 years that benefited in largesse from that presence. Those are the people that are running the resistance against Taliban on international media, and they have the pulpit. The Taliban do not have the pulpit. The Taliban are aware that how they do here is as important as how they do on the ground, and that perceptions change a lot of things. But you have to remember that $10 billion of this country's foreign exchange reserves are frozen. This country is facing a humanitarian crisis. The Taliban have a huge vacuum that they need to fill in as far as governance is concerned.
Okay.
So there are a lot of things going on, and then these images as well. So if you look at it in that context, you'll probably understand the gravity of the situation facing the rulers of this country now.
Interesting. But tell me, Ali, in the light of what happened to these journalists of Etilat Rose and others, the beatings, is somebody like you who's kind of, in a sense, international media, do you feel more anxious or apprehensive now when you go out to report at all?
If I'm being honest with you, I do not. I have journalists here from Euronews. We have journalists from other Turkish news channels. CNN Turk was here. You've got journalists from The Guardian, and they all go out. I usually go out without any escort. It's just me and my cameraman, and we go out and we talk to people. I actually got through to the Taliban in Doha, Qatar, when the US-Taliban deal was being signed. And that's when, after the signing ceremony, I interviewed a few people who are now in very important positions here. And they remembered our coverage from there, TRT's coverage in Doha, Qatar. And they were open to allowing us here because they knew that we will provide the context. We will make an effort to give their side of the story, and we will hold them to account. We have been reporting there have been clashes on the streets. The Taliban use excessive aerial firing. They beat people up. But these are people that have fought 20 years of war. They don't know about crowd management. To look at this situation, Afghanistan, from a Western lens or a liberal lens, I think can be problematic. Afghanistan is Afghanistan. The United States tried for 20 years and $2.3 trillion, according to Brown University, to liberalize this country, to democratize this country. And that experiment didn't work too well. Why? Because there's a huge rural-urban divide. There's a class divide in this country. Most of the areas that the Taliban conquered or captured prior to Ashraf Ghani leaving were through negotiations. In fact, they entered Kabul without firing a single bullet.
Right.
So there's a lot of give and take. It's a class struggle, essentially, that is in place where the Taliban are promising or have promised or had promised to offset the ruling elite, which was disconnected, corrupt, and involved in mass war crimes alongside the United States.
No, that is important context. But in conclusion, then, as a journalist, you say that regardless of these beatings, you feel like the environment is still okay. You can go out and report all sides of the story. If the Taliban are messing up, you can report that. You can report the other side. That's fine, right?
Well, you've been following my work, Srinivasan. You saw the kind of work we've done. You've seen the kind of questions we've asked them, even regarding things like suicide attacks, and they were open to talk about it. But if you go up in their face as an activist and not a journalist and be like, you know what, you're a war criminal, you're an animal, you're subhuman, you suppress women, then you're taking a side.
They'll react.
Our job on the ground is to show what we see, not to counter what we see.
Very, very important. Ali Mustafa, pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time out, and all the best. Stay safe. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Srinivasan. Pleasure.
All right, let's go across to panel. We have with us Professor Faisal Karimi, Associate Journalism Professor at Herat University. Is with us Mahmood Khalili. He's an author and an Afghan expert. But let me just start with Heather Barr, Associate Director, Women's Rights Division, former Afghan researcher at Human Rights Watch. Thank you all patiently for listening in, and apologies for keeping you waiting. Heather Barr, just want to start by asking you, these attacks on journalists, increasing instances of reports of women also being harassed, even beaten. But we also heard somewhat of a nuanced take there from Ali Mustafa of TRT World, who said, look, it seems to be, yes, there are these instances, but it could be far worse if you compare it to Taliban 1.0. What do you make of that? And what are you picking up yourself?
So I wouldn't describe his take as a nuanced take. I would describe it as a pro-Taliban take. I think that, I don't really share his concern about it being unfair to vilify a group that has engaged in lashings, stonings, amputations, and is taking away, once again, most women's rights. So I think that, his description of these protests as being driven by agitators ignores the extent to which there are organic protests by women who are pushing back because they know what women's life was like in 2001, and they're not prepared to have their lives be like that again. And they're coming out on the street, they're risking their lives, they're being beaten by the Taliban. There are fears that violence could escalate, but they're so brave and so unwilling to live under this abusive regime that they're determined to go out no matter what the risk. Okay.
I could see, Mahmood Khalili, that you were nodding along to what Heather was saying. But the point that was being made was that while this may certainly make for extremely disturbing news, the beatings and so on, but that if this was Taliban 1.0, you wouldn't even have journalists out on the streets reporting these stories.
Yes, I think things are different from 20 years ago, but the Afghan people are different now. The Afghan people have seen so much more freedom than they had before. Not only are the Afghan people different, the women are different, the children are different, their standards of education are different. The kind of press that we've had in Afghanistan over the past 20 years, it's been the freest in the region. And so people are used to a certain standard now, and they don't want to give that up. They understand that there's a new regime. But now, as we saw, even women who have the most, to lose went out in masses and started to protest. That is because their passion for their country, Sure. They don't want to give up those freedoms.
No, that's incredibly brave of them. But Professor Karimi, when you look at particularly what's happening with the media, do you think that it's going to get worse? I mean, there was this initial kind of period, Taliban, holding press conferences, women anchors were interviewing them. Do you see a shift already?
Thanks for having me in this session. Unfortunately, the Taliban regime does not believe to democratic values such as freedom of speech and freedom of the media. In such condition, they have a great deal of pressure on journalist activities and media activities in Afghanistan. And these days, we actually experience the dark times of the media activities in the Afghanistan history and during the past 40 years. But right now, the Taliban have not changed yet. They think about like 20 or 25 years ago, but now Afghanistan has changed. Afghanistan, new generation, Afghanistan progressed during the past 20 years.
Right.
And right now, in such critical condition, Afghanistan think traditionally, but now they are against Afghanistan people,
Sure.
Afghanistan women in human rights, and all the democratic values right now. But now, Afghanistan people are stand against Taliban. Do not.
They are speaking out.
Yeah.
Hyderabad, do you think that there will be, because of this violent backlash by the Taliban, do you think that the protests may get impacted, or do you think that the people of the country, especially the women, do you think they'll still be coming out on the streets again?
I think they will, because I think a lot of these women are feeling like they can't live under this regime. It's not possible for them at all. And so they're feeling that, perhaps they could flee the country, but that's not an option for most people. So they're feeling, for a lot of them, I think that they have nothing to lose, that life can't be tolerable under the kind of situation that the Taliban is imposing. And just to highlight what some of those restrictions are, the Taliban spokesperson has said that women should not come out to work because they could be abused by Taliban fighters who haven't been trained properly to deal with women, which is quite ironic to say that because you haven't managed your forces properly or taught them properly, women should stay indoors. Secondary schools are not open in at least many parts of the country. They've imposed these very onerous rules about how women can attend university. You've seen images of university classrooms with a curtain down the middle, which seems ludicrous, honestly. They've banned women's sports. Women in the media have been pushed out of their jobs. I mean, this is a massive rollback of women's rights that's happening. And even if they don't things all the way back to 2001, this is wildly unacceptable for a country that's bound under international law to respect gender equality.
Fair enough. And as I said, the Taliban has actually now put out diktats on how you can protest. You need to give permission in advance. You need to tell them what slogans you're going to chant, which is frankly absurd. But we're out of time. Thank you all so much for joining us. You've been a great panel. And thank you so much for watching Reality Check. Good night.